Dave, I literally just got back from sunny San Diego about 5 hours ago. My plane touched down at 5:30 a.m. and first of all, it was a fantastic time. We'll have to talk about San Diego Comic-Con a little bit today, but the travel is always so interesting. I flew Spirit Airlines, and of course they nickel and dime you every step of the way. And to get a little bit of extra leg room, I spent a little extra money and seated myself in the emergency aisle, right? So if there's an emergency, Brad Geiger will be there to fix everything.
Sure.
But what I saw over 4 legs of my trip coming and going is that time and time again, people would do the same thing I did. They splurged for the leg room, but they had a kid with them. And if you've traveled, you know that you can't have a child in the emergency exit. They want somebody who's an adult, who's, in the case of an emergency, is going to have the mental acuity and the physical strength to get that door open and help people get out, right?
Because aside, Brad, from the clambering part of it, an adult do you have to physically lift the door off its hinges, or do you just have to swing it out?
You've got to. I was actually taking it quite seriously, because I'm like, it'll be my luck the plane goes down and I wasn't paying attention, right? So I was going through all this, and there's a heavy door. You've got and of course they've got it so that it just won't come swinging open by mistake. You've got to really, take a bunch of safeties off and get that door out there.
So imagine that news report, though, like 400 souls were lost today because a cartoonist was sat by the emergency door. The heaviest object he had previously lifted was his Wacom pen tablet.
Much to the dismay of the people standing behind him, hoping to get out. Yeah. So time and again, the flight attendants would have to reseat these people that had booked. And by the way, I know for a fact, when you book an emergency row, this huge notification comes up on your screen saying, no kids, you can't have any kids, right? Well, these people are all surprised every time they had to get reseated. So on my last leg back, of course, it happened again. They had to reseat somebody who brought her kid into the emergency row. And they had to switch seats with somebody else. So they went looking for another couple that would be 2 people they could put in this spot. And they found him from the back of the plane. As they were walking up, the smell of weed coming off of these people.
Welcome to California, Brad.
Yeah, and not only that, but my layover was in Las Vegas, so they were clearly, whatever was happening in Las Vegas was not all staying in Las Vegas. Some of it was still in their clothing and was
to the fabric.
forward.
Yes,
wafting forward 6 rows. So not only these 2 people sit down next to me in the emergency exit, and then proceed to order so many drinks on the flight that the flight attendants finally had to cut them off, because they were ordering they were ordering tequila shots 2 at a time. So, but it was better than having a kid in the row, evidently. Having these 2 people, it really kind of makes you think. It's like, who are we actually better off with? A 14-year-old who's got their head screwed on straight, or these 2?
Yeah, or having Cheech and Chong next to you, like trying to remember which way is up on the door. Oh my God. I've never been on a flight where someone had to be cut off from alcohol before. What's the how do I describe it? What's the policy? How do they, first of all, do you know how many drinks it took before they cut them off?
I didn't, because this was like the last leg, so
well,
I was
like rough math. Was it 2 drinks? Was it?
God, they were doing them 2 at a time, and I know the wait that the flight attendant had been by at least 2 times. So we'll call it 4 shots in.
Oh, wow. So 4 drinks. Okay, so you could do 4.
And then after that, the flight, and whether, maybe she was just being cautious, but she said, listen, it's our policy. I can't overserve you, and you've reached the limit. So I think they gave them like 1 more, so they maybe got to 5 drinks, and then that was it.
Wow.
Yeah.
God, I've never actually seen that happen. So I was, did they accept it or were they kind of grumpy about it?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, they didn't give any trouble. It was just like, okay. You know, it was disappointing. But, you know, again, at that point, it's like 3 o'clock in the morning Eastern time. So it's like, yeah, we'll just go to sleep.
Well, on that note of not going to sleep, I'm going to say hello, everybody, and welcome to Comic Lab, the show about making comics.
And making your liver hurt. And making a living from comics. I'm Brad Geiger, the editor of webcomics.com and the creator of Evil Inc.
And I'm his pal, Dave Kellett, cartoonist of Drive and Sheldon, freshly back from San Diego Comic-Con and the co-director of Stripped.
And this week's Hour of Comics Advice is made possible by your support at patreon.com/comiclab. So Dave, let's talk comics.
Let's talk comics, my friend. And let's talk the topic that it will never happen. But gosh, I would love it if after the Hollywood strike is over, Hollywood never came back to San Diego Comic-Con, Brad.
You are not alone.
Because that was a great show from my perspective.
Yes, I talked to a lot of people, talked to a lot of exhibitors while I was out there, and just saw a lot of people posting on social media that they had record sales because there was so much foot traffic. Whether it was still profitable or not, that's another consideration because it's also a very expensive show to do.
Yes.
And we've talked about that an awful lot. You talk about how you mitigate your costs. So whether it was record profitability, I don't know, but record sales, I was seeing that left and right. People were very, very happy that Hall H was not there.
Yeah, and so the show itself, for those unfamiliar, because there was no Hollywood actors, there was no Hollywood writers, so there was no Hollywood promotion. So none of the big Hall H things, again, just to remind everybody, were happening. So no one was like sleeping out overnight waiting in line. No one was waiting in a signature line for a signed photograph, which they often have to pay for. So there were more people and more money flowing on the exhibition hall floor. Even though there was 5,000 to 10,000 people less this year than last year because of canceled tickets. And so we can go into that if we need to. But basically, people were canceling in the weeks running up to the show, thinking it was not going to be very good. About 5,000 to 10,000 people less than last year. And yet, Brad, the floor felt just as, if not more busy than previous years. And money was flowing. Goodness gracious, the money was flowing. Two Lumps, who exhibits next to me, and the remnants of Topatico, who exhibits across from me, Sam Logan, and like all recorded record sales, and myself included. It was just a gangbuster show.
Yeah, and I was walking the floor a lot more than I do at a typical convention. I was out there kind of walking around enjoying the show, and I'm telling you, it was shoulder to shoulder every day, from rope drop to finish. It was hard to walk around on that floor because there was so many people around.
And I have to embarrassingly admit that I was wrong. I thought, and I said on, I think 3 episodes ago, and I agreed with Brad too. So but I was wrong when I said I didn't think it would materially change my sales. I mean, unless I was suddenly the golden child, it sure did materially change my sales. And I have to admit, I was wrong. People were right to ask me if I should or would pack more. I should have packed more with dinosaurs. I sold out on Sunday morning, and I absolutely could have sold more copies because people were coming back asking for it. So I know at least 6 or 7 people were wanting the book that didn't get it. So I was wrong, Brad.
Yeah. Oh, you and me both. We both had that same prediction, and I was probably a little bit more confident in my prediction than you were. Like, I was dead set. There's no way these people are going to show up for a show that isn't there and be happy. They're going to be disgusted. They're going to be angry. That was my fear. And man, oh man, did I ever have that wrong. People were very happy to be there. The bad news is Hall H is definitely coming back next year. There's no way it's not coming back. And this is a moment that I don't think as exhibitors we're ever going to see again.
No, I don't know that I will be able to match my numbers next year that I had this year. And I did say to people that I would tell you what the numbers were. So I might as well be honest about it. So This year was a $3,500 increase over last year's sales. I just did the rough numbers. So last year was about $12,500. This year, I broke a number I've never broken before, $16,000. That's a bonkers amount of sales for Comic-Con. For me, I know there's people that do more. I know there's people that do less. For me, that was like a personal best. And to your point, Brad, I don't know that I'll be able to do that next year with Hall H back open again.
No, and as a matter of fact, I think again, you take my predictions for what they're worth on this topic, but I think you'd be making a huge mistake if you packed the number of books, or if you increase the number of books that you brought for next year because you hit that sales record this year. I think you'd be making a mistake, because I don't see that happening again under traditional circumstances.
Okay, I'm so glad you brought this up, because I actually meant to ask you at the end of the show. We didn't really get to have a post-show dinner. I was going to ask you, how do you think I should pack? So you think I should pack just the way I packed this year? Because I think I'll have a tiny surplus next year. Sorry, but I want to hear your opinion.
So from an outsider's point of view, the thing that really makes you powerful at one of these shows is you've got now two books that I would, not only are they excellent cartoon collections, they're excellent showcases of your work. And I'm speaking specifically of the Pugs book and the Anatomy of Dinosaurs book, right? They're really good showcases of your work, but they work amazingly well as gifts. You've got two books that I would classify as gift books.
Yes.
And we both saw all week long people coming up and grabbing that Pug book because, I've got a pug at home. Or grabbing that dinosaurs book saying, little Jimmy at home loves dinosaurs. Yes. And then the second sentence in each case was, and I promised I'd bring them home something from the show. And then boom. And then you'd hit them with, and I'll put a free sketch in it to personalize it for you. And the sale was made. And it takes you about, I should have timed you. It was under a minute. You do these sketches; they're beautiful sketches, but you've got them ready in your head, and you're doing them in between a minute and a half. Let's say if you're talking a little bit. So it doesn't take long to get that sketch in the book, and then you're on to the next sale. Those two books, I would listen. I always am in favor of you bringing more Pug books, but watching the Anatomy of Dinosaurs book sell, I think if you increase volume on anything, it's those two books.
Well, just those two books, because I actually know how many I brought of those two, and Dinosaurs sold out. I don't have the hard numbers in front of me, but just those two books are $6,000 in sales. Just those two books. Almost split evenly, 3 and 3.
Yeah.
So it might be more like 6,500 if I do the hard numbers. But anyway, so that represents more than a third of the sales of the entire booth. And I'll tell you another one, and this is a pro tip, frankly, for people that are thinking about doing shows. My wonderful assistant, Beth, who in so many respects is more talented than I in certain design aspects that I just don't have a skill for. She and I have been slowly adding pins to my repertoire because they are the most packable and giftable things. And the return on investment on them is amazing for us.
Yeah.
And they're just fun to make. It's fun to make a physical object like a pin in a way that I can't describe. Brad, like when you see the Comic Lab pins, aren't they fun to just hold in your hand and like you have this physical object?
Yeah. And pins are very, you've got that person with a collectible mentality. Well, I saw somebody that had bought a purse specifically that had a little showcase in front of it, a little plastic covered thing. So they could put all their pins on the purse, and then they had like a cool purse, right? But it was all built around these pins. And I remember saying to you at the show that you didn't do that all in 1 year. You slowly built up 3 pins a year until a whole, maybe a fifth of your booth space was pins. And then you had a special price for if you buy 3, you get them at a discounted cost. And people were picking them up 3 at a time. And because there was a big selection, you had a fantastic sales on pins.
So two things. One of Brad and I always preach about keeping your head on a swivel and learning from industries that aren't even what we do. Like Brad and I make cartoons, we make comics.
Right.
But in the case of pins, I 100% learned that from every Disney physical location you ever go to.
Yeah.
Pin trading is such an amazing subculture in the Disney world.
Yeah.
And Disney has built and sustained and encouraged that whole crowd of pin collectors in the Disney world. So I learned that from them, from Disney. And then the second thing that I learned was from retail, from my time at Mattel Toys, which is pins have a density of value on a shelf space. I would very often previously at conventions, I just want to compare this to everybody because this is a good learning moment. Previously, I would do a lot of prints and posters. Well, guess what travels terribly and takes up a lot of table space for the value that they bring in? Posters. They are terrible for conventions and terrible for how much surface space they take up on a table. Compare that to pins, Brad, the density of how many square feet those pins took up versus how much money they generated. Don't you think that there is a direct comparison between posters and pins?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. And by the way, that I did that time and time again. I saw some gorgeous posters that I'm like, oh, my kids would like that, or one kid in particular would like that one. And I'm like, I'm never going to get it home in good shape. And then it's like, even if I do, are they going to put it on their wall or is it just going to go, in a pile somewhere? Whereas a pin, it's going to get put on a piece of clothing or on a hat or on a pin board. That it's going to get displayed. Plus, you had that amazing synergy because when somebody picked up a pug book, the first words out of your mouth is, oh, if you like that, you should check out some of our pug pins, right? Yeah. And then time and time again, people would buy a book and a bunch of pins. And so one sale led to another, set led to another. It was really, and again, it was nothing that you could have done in 1 year or 2 years. This was something that you had to develop through years and years of convention exhibiting before you got to the point that you had enough stock and enough mental acuity of how to display all of that stuff. It's one of the things that having said all of that I still warn young people against doing conventions because what I see on social media all the time is, hey, I just got accepted to the Dubuque Comic-Con. Now I'm going to go and print up some comics. Well, that's the wrong way to do a show.
That's not how this works. Yeah.
You've got to have a garage, a storage space full of stock like Dave does, so you can go out and really make a profit at these shows.
Absolutely. This is 24 years of slowly adding building stuff, as it is slowly adding and building supplies for a Comic-Con, certain racks, certain displays. Every year I make an outlay of $100 or so to buy one new thing to add it to the booth. And Brad sees that after 24 years, it's a very nicely, tightly packed booth for displays.
Yeah, it was something that I was absolutely gobsmacked, was that when I walked up to your booth, the first thing, as somebody who's exhibited in the past, the first thing that I noticed was that you had every square inch optimized for sales. Like there was not a square inch that had been left to waste, and every place was vertical, everything was up. There was tons. It would be interesting to have taken account. We should have done this. Taken account of the number of books and pins and other things. Your original art display was picture perfect. What a great way to. They were in like basically a bookcase so that they could be displayed vertically and you could flip through them. In other words, you saw, it wasn't like I see original art all over the show floor. They're in those black portfolio booklets that you got to flip through. It's got the plastic binder and stuff, and you flip. Horrible way to present original art.
And it takes up a lot of space. Yeah.
Yes. And flat on the table space. Useless space.
Yeah.
Yours was up. You could see them. It was presented. It was clean. It was gorgeous. And your stuff holds up very well in real life. And I would have loved to have gone back and counted the number of items that you had and then put that against a square footage to see what the density was. It would have been an impressive number without a doubt.
Yeah. One learning that I had this year, and it was a slowly dawning learning lesson over the show, is because there are fewer and fewer and fewer artists at Comic-Con every year, year over year, there's fewer and fewer artists. Or the ones that are there, they all tend to be way down at the far end in Artist Alley, right?
Yeah.
So that a lot of people assumed that my original art was prints, that it wasn't an artist made this thing, right?
Oh.
So a lesson that I take away from the show is that I have to have better signage saying, this is not, something to say, this is not a print, this is original art. I had it, but I clearly was not visible enough because people would go to buy it and they'll be like, how much for this print? And I say, oh, that's an original art. And it's $150. And for that type of person, it would very quickly go back on the shelf,
Oh,
rightly so, because if I thought it was a print, that I was just getting for like a coworker, I'm not ready to spend $150. But what's great is I doubled my physical space for original art this year. And I got to tell you, that really paid off because they don't sell often. They only sell one every 2 hours, every 3 hours. But when they sell, it makes up for 15, 20 pin sales, for example,
Yes. Yeah, they don't have to sell often. Right? Because it's 100% profit other than the time that you put into preparing them and the sleeves that they go into, right? But aside from that, they're profit. So they don't have to sell all that often. They're a premium object. Yeah, I could see where maybe signage is going to be a challenge there because if that's happening on the regular, then you definitely have something that needs to be solved there. But in general, just seeing that and also, and I complimented you on this at the time, you've got a square booth and you cut it on the diagonal. So you actually have a triangular display, which is smart on so many levels because in terms of sight lines, people walking up the different aisles and stuff, that triangular display actually, I think, in my opinion, maximizes sight lines. Plus, the second half of the triangle, which is behind, you can't see anything behind your cutoff, which is your booth, your banner that goes vertical. That's all boxes and a chair to sit in and water and snacks. But nobody can see you back there. In fact, at one point Sunday, I had gotten a little bit crowded out. Like I got all peopled out and I just came back there and snuck past you and sat in that chair and had a bottle of water and stole some of your Oreo cookies. Sorry about that. And just sat and decompressed for 15 minutes. It was like first aid for my mind because it was the one place on the show floor where nobody could see you.
Yeah. And, we designed it that way. And it has like a draping that Beth wonderfully sewed. Although, Brad, now I could sew it now that I've learned how to sew. But Beth sewed the draping a couple years back because we realized if you go full height to floor where no one can see past, Beth could say in good conscience, Dave's not here. He's taking a break. And then I could have a 10-minute mental health break where I just go back, sip some water. And honestly, the sound levels are down by about 10, 15 decibels back there. And there's sort of a piece that it really is restorative to have that at a Comic-Con. So anyway, gosh, it was a lovely show. And thank you, as always, to everyone who came out. It feeds my soul for the rest of the year, for the kind words for Comic Lab, the kind words for Sheldon Drive, and for Evil Inc. that Brad heard this year. And so we thank you, everybody who came out. It was really lovely. To have everybody. And hopefully we can do it again with Brad coming out for a Comic Lab panel next year because that was delightful.
If we get another chance to do Comic Lab Live, which you folks, we will have a little bit more information on that later about the Comic Lab Live. But if we get another chance to do Comic Lab Live, I will absolutely be out there for that show.
Yes, and I will put a bug in your ear because we'll have more information in probably by next week. But we recorded the San Diego Comic-Con panel for Comic Lab. It will be available only for patrons. So that's going to be a special offer coming up, but join us now. There's no reason to hesitate. You're going to get that episode. You're going to love it. And in the meantime, you're going to jump in on an amazing, thriving community of professionals, pro-ams, all sorts of cartoonists sharing their tips and tricks on the Discord server. You'll get the episodes early, and you'll get this episode of San Diego Comic-Con Comic Lab with your Patreon membership. Hey, if you're listening while you work, take a minute to stand and stretch.
And while you're doing that, we're going to tell you why you should join us on Patreon.
When you do, you're going to get hours and hours of podcasts that we've recorded just for backers.
And exclusive Patreon posts that go even deeper on Comic Lab topics.
And access to our exclusive Discord server, which is a thriving community of professional cartoonists.
So you can support the show you love and get tons of actionable resources for your own cartooning.
And listen, if you can't swing a pledge this month, we get it. No worries.
Yeah, listen, you can still support the show by rating us wherever you get your podcasts.
Just leave a 5-star review and a few kind words.
That, along with mentions on social media, is incredibly helpful.
Now, everybody, let's talk comics.
Dave, I've got an update for you, and it goes right under the heading of everything old is new again.
Okay.
And it's a fascinating conversation that I had just before leaving for San Diego Comic-Con. I was talking with my 17-year-old son, and he's really fascinated in what's going on in social media and everything. So he's out on Blue Sky, and he was talking about Twitter, or I guess pretty soon we're going to have to start calling it X, which I guess is another update that we're going to have to start talking about pretty soon. But he's been taking an interest in what I've been posting and how I've been posting and so forth. And he said, Dad, you keep putting your link on your Threads on your Threads posts. You keep putting a link to Evil Inc. And he goes, I got to tell you, I would never, ever click that link. Oh. I said, why not?
Yeah.
He goes, because every time I see a link on social media, I know that it's going to a paywall site. I know it's going to a Patreon or to New York Times where it's paywalled, or to a news site, or to something that is paywalled. Yes. And he says, I wouldn't click that link at all because I know it's going to a paywall site.
Interesting.
And it was something that because I'd been on social media for 20 years, I didn't have that perspective. But talking to a 17-year-old, somebody who's got a very different perspective on social media, he's been on it for a much shorter period of time, he had a different perspective on this. So it's time. I wanted to ask you, and I want to make it very, very clear that I've always said, if your marketing language is you should read my comic because it's free, you're making a huge mistake. And I still think that that's a mistake. I think you should say why it's good. Here's why you should read my comic. It's good. I'm proud of it. It brings me joy. All kinds of things you can say, but read it because it's free, I think is bad marketing language. However, my question to you is it time for us to start reincorporating that word free, not necessarily as the main pitch, but as a part of an overall bigger pitch to say, by the way, this link is free?
It's funny because you often talk about mirror marketing versus the market itself, and how for you and I, because we sort of have our trusted sources on social media, and when they say click this link, we assume that it is a free and clear link. It's interesting to hear from a teenager who grew up in a different social media marketplace, that to them, when someone says click a link, they're like, what's this going to? Where, what do I got to pay to see this link? I don't know. And so, I can see how for a certain type of person, if the link doesn't start with Reddit or doesn't start with, a URL that they know for a fact is free, they would just assume that it's a paywall.
Yeah, and especially if it's going to a dedicated URL like Sheldon Comics or Evil Inc. It's like, that's definitely, I'm going to get paywalled right off the bat. Why am I clicking that link in the first place?
Right. So let me ask you this. Both of us have Patreon sort of limiters now on our full archives or our full showings. So how do we because you want to say it in the fewest number of words, but you also want it to be accurate. Would I now say something like, read 2 years of my archives for free? Or how would I best say that? Or should I just say, read the archives for free? And the expectation is, well, you're getting 2 years of it for free. That's still legally accurate. Or what are your thoughts on that?
My thoughts are don't go looking for trouble. So I would say click their link to read the comic for free. In fact, maybe I would just say read the comic for free without any or read. You know what I mean? I don't know that I would go much beyond that because I want to just get them over to the site. But once we start to throw caveats and all that stuff in, because we're all in our heads, we're worried about what happens if. Right. What happens if someone says this? What if someone says that? Well, if that happens, then you'll address it when that happens. But in the meantime, you can get all in your head when really the thing you've got to do is just to say, hey, this is a free link. This is a free link. It's a free site. You're not going to get paywalled. That's what you've got to get as a part of a bigger marketing message.
Can I tell you, you immediately found the right answer. I was overthinking it. And what's nice is there is a double meaning towards saying read the comic, because in that instance, it's both explicitly stating you can read this comic for free on the website. But then broader speaking, the phrase the comic implies you can read the entire archives. So you are a little bit dancing on both lanes there, but that's okay because it's broadly speaking, it's still accurate. So yes, I've overthought it, and yes, your answer is the better one. Yes.
So that's what I'm thinking. Is like for guys like us who spent the early 2000s saying, free webcomics, and of course it wasn't free; it was ad supported, but I'm actually finding that I'm throwing that in at the end. Again, not saying, hey, read my free comic, because that's not a very good marketing pitch. But once I say why it's good, I'll mention as I'm walking my way up to the link that it's a free link. I think it's time for us to start reincorporating that for the people who are paywall weary.
Well, first of all, I think you're right. I think this is a good advice. My second follow-up question is, and then we can sort of leave this topic. Do you see anywhere on the horizon or the broader picture of comics, is there anywhere where you can't read a comic for free, where it's immediately paywalled? Like I'm thinking of Webtoons, Tapas, comics.com, any sort of independent web comic. Can you think of anywhere where it's like, well, I guess there are some that might be just like out of the gate, it's only unlocked by Patreon. That would seem dumb to me, but maybe that exists.
I think if someone is already swimming in the comics waters, they know the score, right? Like they're not expecting it to be a paywalled site. They're like, webcomic sites are usually free. Webtoons is free, Tapas and everything. But if we are in audience building and if we're trying to grow our audience, we're really not looking for people who are swimming in the comics waters. I mean, those are great, and those are going to be easier for us to pull in. Right. But when I'm doing social media, I'm always kind of thinking in the back of my head, what I want is not only a comics reader, that's great, but I want somebody who doesn't define themselves as a comics reader, who comes over and says, oh my gosh, I love this. I want more of it. Right. That's because I see that as a bigger audience building potential than somebody who's already into webcomics.
Yeah. Well, let's jump into our second update today. And this is perhaps already dated by the time this show comes out to air. But I just want to talk for a brief second about Musk's rebranding of Twitter to X or whatever the hell it's going to be. Because I see this as such a exercise in panic and weird, egotistically bad ideas. Panic because it's like you have rightly pointed out elsewhere, and I would love for you to talk about this. It's very much shifting the deck chairs on the Titanic. Like it doesn't fix underlying problems. It just is like putting on a new coat of paint on a building that's burning down. And then the other one is, it seems to me like it is so rare in marketing, in advertising, to get your company name to become a verb. So you have Google, you have Jacuzzi, you have Kleenex. You have a couple of brand names that have become so embedded within our culture that their brand name becomes the activity itself, right? It becomes the action. That to tweet, honestly, Brad, sometimes I'm on Threads and I'm like, well, I got to tweet this. And I'm on Threads. It's I'm not tweeting it. I'm threading it or whatever the hell it is. I'm posting it.
Exactly.
Whatever and on Mastodon, I'm tooting, and on Blue Sky, I'm twerking. I don't even know what I'm doing on there.
There is a word for what it is on Blue Sky, but I don't even know what it is because it's not sticking. It's so
the point being, they're all playing off of an established social phrase, which is to tweet, right? Like, you know immediately what that is. And this moron is moving away from that to a letter which almost universally in Western culture is representative of adult content, right?
Yes.
And then when it's not representative of adult content, it literally is used by marketing departments and science departments as the stand-in name before they go to a product. So it's like the X product when we launch that in Q4, and then they'll come up with the name for the X product. Like, it's the thing you have before you have it. It's such a stupid name. And also, he didn't do a full trademark search on it. And also, there's just a million reasons why this is a bad idea.
And whoever did the spec work to design the logo, it sounds, from what I see or from what I'm hearing, it sounds as if they chose a font that cannot be copyrighted. It's replete with bad judgment. And like you said, he's going to have trademark disputes. And of course, since he fired most of his lawyers at Twitter, he's going to be going up against either Facebook or Microsoft, both of whom have entire departments full of lawyers. It's a terrible, terrible mistake on his part. And I read somewhere that the estimates are between like $500 million and $4 billion of brand valuation that he just flushed down the toilet.
Yeah, because what were you buying when you bought Twitter for $44 billion? You were buying the pre-existing audience, you were buying the pre-existing technology, and you were buying the name, which had become a global name. It had been cleared already in every single market, and that is not a small thing. Let me tell you, from my days working in trademark with the USPTO and with the EU and with the British markets and the Australian markets, it's hard to clear a trademark in multiple markets. And then it's hard to clear a trademark in multiple markets and own the URL as well in multiple markets for multiple permutations. It is a hard thing. There's a reason why rebrandings take years. There's a lot of legal work. There's a lot of marketing work. There's a lot of testing work. This jackass just within 24 hours, it sounds like, and the design teams, it sounds like, had 3 weeks tops to redo it. And they picked a Unicode X like geniuses.
Yes.
The whole thing is just a clusterfuck, Brad, of just bad decision making, you know?
Well, here's the thing that's really interesting is that it sounds like this whole X thing is something that it's been his baby pet
his white
idea.
Whale,
from the very beginning, going back to PayPal, when he was brought into PayPal, he wanted to rebrand it with an X or 2X, PayPal X, maybe even eventually becoming X. He loved that whole X. There was Space X.
His AI thing is called XAI. There's a Tesla called the Model X. Yeah, he loves X.
It's all his one idea that he can't get away from. And I was wondering on the way over to the studio whether there's a parallel for creative people. Sometimes do you think that we as creative people get that one idea that we had back in high school and we just can't let go of it, no matter how many times we see it? Either we get a chance to use it like SpaceX, or we see it fail horribly like PayPal X. Sounds like that kind of bounced right out of the company from what I hear. Is there a parallel there for creators?
By the way, just yes, we can talk about that in a second, but also Peter Thiel was right. PayPal is the perfect name for what that does. It was an immediately friendly, immediate alliteration. You got it out in 2 syllables, in 6 letters, with a super trademarkable name. That was a great name. And to try to make it X.com, Musk is a jackass. Anyway, so about ideas that we had in high school, we have seen, Brad, in our lifetime, multiple cartoonists keep going back to the well because they think they have this one idea. And actually, that's heartbreaking in and of itself. But the idea that I wanted to broach about this with you is like, how do you and I and everyone listening, how do we distinguish our bad idea that for whatever reason we can't drop? And I have them too. I will be the first to admit this. Ideas that I have had since high school that I can't get rid of, but they keep popping back up into my mind like, now, question mark, shrug? Shall we try it again? Right? Those kind of creative ideas. How do we distinguish those from the people who tried the thing, failed, tried the thing, failed, tried the thing, failed? Fifth try, it becomes $100 million company, or it becomes, I don't know, Garfield or Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles or whatever it is, you know? How do we distinguish the madmen from the genius in terms of an idea that they can't let go of, like Musk with an X?
That's such a great question, and I think anybody who tells you that there's an easy answer to it is completely blindsiding you. They're full of crap, because I don't think there's an easy answer, because it's so pernicious in our society. So many of our heroes are lauded because they stuck with their ideas at all costs.
Yes.
Right? Steve Jobs is kind of a good example about this. He kept trying to make that idea of his work under different guises. He kept bringing it back until finally it was Apple computers. And so many other examples. It didn't work in the 60s. It didn't work in the 70s. It didn't work in the 80s, but I stuck with it. And now in the 90s, I became a multimillionaire. It's really tricky because so many of our success stories are the story of the visionary who saw this thing through. He believed in it, or she believed in it all the way until finally the world was ready for it, or finally it was ready for the world. But out of those 5 or 6 examples in pop culture and in American history or world history of that happening, there are tens of thousands of ideas of peoples who kept flogging away at this thing, and it didn't work. It just was never going to work. So I'll give you one actionable idea, and it goes back to advice that I've got for people all the time. Find yourself a friend like Dave Kellett, because I've got a very small number of friends, and you're one of them, that I could go to and say, cut the bullshit, tell me exactly what you think. Is this a good idea? And you would give me exactly your thought on it, even if you knew it was going to break my heart. And you need a friend who can look you in the eye and tell you that this idea ain't going to go nowhere.
Yeah, it's tricky, though, because so much of comic success is self-belief, even when no one else believes in you, Yep. You and I, Brad, could have gone to one another at the right times and said, Brad, don't do Evil Ink, or Brad, Dave, don't do Drive, or don't do Comic Lab. Friends could have come to us and said, don't do Comic Lab, or Dave, don't do Stripped, or whatever project it is. And they would have been wrong, and we needed that self-belief. And so this is why it's so hard, because I always think about that scientist who, in our childhoods, Brad, everyone thought that ulcers were caused by stress and spicy food. Everyone thought that. And then that one scientist literally went up on stage with a little vial of H. pylori, drank it on stage, proved that H. pylori caused ulcers, took the medicine to get rid of the H. pylori, and scientists were aghast that he did this, but it worked. Like, he knew that ulcers were caused by H. pylori. And like the self-belief amongst an entire group of world-class educated scientists that were saying, you're an idiot, don't do this.
Yeah.
But how do we instruct our fellow cartoonists, our fellow artists, our fellow creators to somehow thread the needle between visionary and going creatively mad for an idea that doesn't deserve it?
I don't know. I honestly don't know. I mean, I'll tell you what and I've told this story before. What happened for me was I with Greystone Inn, the moment that I knew that it just wasn't working was that when I was met with a comic convention that just nobody wanted what I was peddling. Right. And I on the plane home, I'm like, I really got to rethink that. I think being honest with yourself and objective with yourself when you're met with failure, and you can say, okay, I've got to retool this. I got to be honest with myself about the failure. It's part of why I'm such a stickler on so many of these business related things. Yeah. Like when we talk, I'll go back to conventions one more time, doing the honest math, saying that you had your most profitable convention ever, right? The first question I've got is, what were your costs?
Yeah.
And it's not that I'm trying to take away your success.
No, but you're right.
It's not that I'm trying to be a downer, but it's the first question I got. What were your costs? So being honest with yourself about the times when it's just not working, and then not saying, oh, that was a failure, but saying, what can I do to adjust this? And even if it means working on another thing for a little while, that's one of your options.
Well, maybe I'm proposing this possibility. Maybe that in trying to thread the self-belief between, am I a visionary or am I a mad person creatively for going down this path? Maybe one of the answers is your advice, your separate advice of don't listen to your reader, but listen to your readers. Yeah. And so if Brad Geiger or Dave Kellett come to you and say, this idea is weird, it's not very good, maybe don't listen to that. But if 40 other cartoonists come to you and say, like, hey, this idea is weird, and your audience is going, and they're voting with their feet to go somewhere else, and the Kickstarters aren't working, and the Patreons aren't working, and the first book isn't working, that might be the sign you need that it was a worthwhile effort. Take it as a learning moment and move on to the next project, but don't double down, triple down on this project. Is that a possibility, Brad?
Oh, I think it's a probability. I think it goes beyond possibility. I think that's a really good one. And I'll give you just one more that popped into my head when I was listening to you talk. And that is, give yourself permission not to stop a project, but to pause a project. And I've become a big fan of this, right? Because I think the idea of stopping projects has so much guilt and failure and so much mental baggage to it that we never do it, right? Because if I've stopped Evil Ink, then I failed at it. And by the way, I think that's one of the reasons Musk is bringing back X, because he thinks if I can make X work for Twitter, then I'm not a failure from that debacle at PayPal. Right. I was just a visionary who didn't have his time yet.
Oh, you're saying it's part of his personal story, is what you're saying.
It's part of his personal arc, his redemption arc.
I
for
was
X,
right in the 90s. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. And if you would have just listened to me, and now the world's ready for my genius. So what I'm going to suggest, throwing it out there, is not stopping a project that's faltering, not stopping that thing that you suspect isn't there yet, but pausing it, giving yourself permission to pause, work on something else for 6 months or a year, and then see what happens. And maybe you learn something. Maybe that new thing catches fire. Maybe that new thing is even worse than the old thing, and you go running back to the old thing, right? But give it a chance and give yourself permission to grow and learn, and keep yourself open to go into a third thing, right? Okay. Because I think we make, especially cartoonists our age, Dave, have so much wrapped up in the Garfield mode. Right? You do that one thing that you launched in 1960, and you do it for 7 decades in a row. And that's how success is defined. And I'm telling you, there's a lot of stories out there of people who have a whole bunch of titles behind their name, a whole bunch of creations that they put out, some of which weren't that great, some of which were great. And it's kind of like one is a stepping stone to the next, to the next, to the next. I want you, if you think that you might be in this zone of, flogging away at a dead horse, to give yourself permission to pause.
Yeah. And honestly, those kind of pauses can be worked into the broader world sometimes. For example, I was able to sort of pause Sheldon to do Stripped, pause Sheldon to do Anatomy Comics, pause this, pause that. I paused Drive to also finish up Stripped. And sometimes you come back at 110% creatively with the project, seeing the flaws that you had missed before and ready to tackle new ways of doing it. And sometimes you see that it was mostly flaws and it was not worth going back to it. Yeah. So both of those can be true. Anyway, Brad, I think that's great advice. And so in and amongst this weird period where we see this billionaire making repeated mistakes and deck chair moving on the Titanic of this crashing Twitter thing, I can't even call it X. It's weird to call it X. I don't like it. It's odd in the mouth. It's not, none of this works.
No, it's not good. In fact, we're going to see people continue to call it Twitter. We're going to see them call it tweeting, retweeting. We're going to see all of that vernacular used even after he semi-successfully tries to do this rebrand. And then, the danger is once we do start getting used to calling it X, whoever is the rightful trademark owner is going to make him stop. He's going to have to go back and call it something else. It's just, there's no good path forward for this. So, Dave, we've got time to sneak in one quick question. I think we can do this relatively quickly in the time we've got left. Somebody has written in from our Patreon backers. Danny wrote in, and Danny says, I've mostly drawn on Procreate on my iPad, which has been fine for digital, but I want to start setting myself up for eventual hard copy printing. I'm stumbling around on the most efficient way to draw to be print ready down the road while being in Procreate. Should I export pages to Photoshop or Illustrator, import each panel and rasterize to scale, get a fancy Cintiq and draw directly into Illustrator? Any tips or resources would be great help. Thanks for being informative and funny. So Danny is saying, hey, I want to go pro-am. I want to print my comics in books and collections. Yes. I'm in Procreate. What do I do?
Well, the good news, bad news for you, Danny, here is that neither Brad nor I draw in Procreate specifically, but between the two of us, we both have about 25 years of experience on drawing on some type of software that will eventually get translated into print, right? And that has transcended everything from Quark Express to Illustrator to PageMaker to Adobe InDesign to Photoshop to CSP, right? We've used a lot of different software programs. And the good thing for you advice-wise is that a lot of the data of what goes on when pixels become print is still the same thing. So the advice that Brad will, and I'll hand it over to Brad, that Brad will mainly give you works for multiple platforms, multiple software packages, because it's still the same bits of settings that you'll need to have when you start to move pixels to print.
Yeah. And again, and with the full disclaimer out front, I don't work in Procreate. I don't know from Procreate. Okay, so
that's a great phrase. I don't know from Procreate. I like that.
Yeah. I'm going to give you a couple of things that I know in general from somebody who does have a deep catalog in the print side of things. And you can tell me whether you think that this is applicable, okay? So there's two things that I want to see out of any software that I'm thinking about using for creating comics, okay? The first is resolution. I want to know that I can work in high resolutions at large sizes. Those are two different issues there. I'm going to go through them one at a time. Right. Number one, resolution. I want to work at 400 DPI or PPI, the two are interchangeable, or higher. So 400 is the least that I would accept. I know people say 300. Me personally, I work at 400 just to hedge my bets.
And also because hard drives are so big now. Like an extra 100 DPI, it's worth doing. It's worth just jumping in to say that.
Yes, you might as well give yourself that extra comfort zone, right? And also, I'm drawing my pages physically larger in terms of inches, inches width by inches height. I'm drawing those pages physically larger than I expect them to be in the book. I'm going to get some resolution out of that too. Also, I'm going to get things like my lines are going to get a little bit tighter, a little bit more graceful.
Yes.
I'm going to get a lot of visual advantage out of drawing large and shrinking. I've got to know that whatever software that I use and whatever hardware, because, it's one thing if Procreate enables you to set up 400 DPI and you work maybe 150% larger than you expect. That's great if Procreate allows you to do that. Now, does your iPad enable you to draw that without having lag or skips or stuff like that? That's the other part of the equation for me. And it's something that you're going to have to find out for yourself. I don't know. Right. So the first thing that I'm looking for if I want somebody going to print is, can they handle the resolution? Not only DPI or PPI, but also working larger and shrinking in the final product. So that's my resolution. Number two, I want to know that I can work in native CMYK, that I can produce those pages in a CMYK format. Now, I know that me and Dave are probably some of the last two people that actually worry about this, right? Because some of you are using digital printing and you can upload an RGB. In fact, they prefer you to upload an RGB for digital printing, okay? But the real profit is being made when you're doing offset because you can lean into the volume at that point. So that's not for me, right? Digital printing is not going to be the solution so much for me. I want the same for you too. I want you to be able to output CMYK files.
Well, and I want to clarify this part for people because in our lifetime, the software settings that can convert RGB to CMYK has gotten better. It's gotten pretty good. But here are the limitations that we're up against. RGB, and I don't remember, I don't have them in front of me, but I'm going to say some broad strokes numbers and then you'll see where I'm getting at. RGB, because it's projected light on a screen, which is what RGB is designed for, can make, I don't remember how many tens of millions of individual colors.
It's in the millions.
It's in the millions, yeah. But once you bring it into print and you have 4 color plates, cyan, yellow, magenta, and black, CYMK, once you have those 4 plates, sometimes mixing, sometimes not, sometimes overlaying, sometimes not, sometimes interplaying, sometimes not, you go from millions to, I think it's in the hundreds of thousands, isn't it, Brad? If not less?
Yeah. I would have guessed actually tens of thousands, but you're making your point.
Yeah, the broader point being, and the numbers don't matter because who knows, who cares? The numbers don't matter. The idea being, though, is that you could draw for the perfect color. And I'm thinking specifically about oranges and greens. You found the perfect orange and green in RGB. Yep. Well, when that computer goes to try to make that into a CYMK, I guarantee you 4 times out of 5, that orange or that green is going to look wonky in CYMK. Yeah. So how much better for you as an artist to be natively drawing in CYMK, know what the limitations are, see the limitations, and be able to choose wisely and creatively from the oranges and the greens. And I don't know why I'm defaulting that. It's just because those are the weirdest ones in CYMK to try to choose. But when you're doing it natively, you'll see them and you'll choose based on the more limited palette.
Right. So the least I would expect would be is if you are working in RGB that you can turn on a CMYK preview. Yeah. So that you can see how it's going to look in CMYK. That would be the least I would expect out of something, right? Yeah. Now, I want to be able to output a true CMYK file because that's what I know. It comes down to comfort. I know how to look at those files. I know exactly what I'm going to get. Now, I've seen people take something that was made native RGB, print it in offset on a CMYK setting, and because they were able to keep that registration so tight, right? The black ink was being separated across all 4 of those plates, cyan, magenta, yellow, and black, gave it a nice rich black, which we have to kind of make on the fly with our files when Alex and I do them. But they're able to keep that registration so tight that it works out just fine. Yeah. There's not a problem. And me coming from a newspaper background 20 years ago, where registration was often off by like a half of an inch, it was way off. I still have nightmares about registration issues. So to help me sleep better at night, I keep it in my comfort zone. So what I'm trying to say is, you may not go to DEFCON 1 with CMYK like I do, but the least I would want for you in whatever software that you're using is the ability to put on a CMYK preview, because then you're not making a color that isn't printable. For me, I would want a native CMYK file, but I know that I'm the oddball in that regard.
Yeah, and then one that I would add, and this is far lower on the list from resolution and page size, which I agree with Brad, will get you the higher data quality as it translates into print, right? When it's at a higher DPI and when it's at a slightly larger size. For example, I draw a drive at twice the size. I draw it like at 16 inches tall versus the 8 inches that I normally print it at, right? Yep. So that gives you an idea of and it just gets you a little more data when it goes to print. But the other thing that I would suggest, it's not a hard and fast rule, but I would suggest if you can keep your blacks on their own layers, it allows for a little bit better fine tuning and adjustment when it comes time to bring to print, which has both rich blacks and what's the other black? Rich black and
but I just call it 100% black because it's no other inks on the plate other than black.
Right. So what I'm getting at there is there's times in Photoshop exporting and in other programs where you can use something like there's a subsetting called curves in Photoshop where you can fiddle with the blacks and you can do a little bit. But usually our lettering is in black and usually our line art is in black. That's not always true anymore. But by keeping those on a separate layer, you will eventually come to find that you can do better fine tuning when it comes time to the test pages that you'll get back from the printer. And that would be a bit of advice that I would give you as well.
Yep. I agree 100%. I agree 100%. I wouldn't have it any other way. But again, I know that there's some people that are like, nah, you guys are a little bit fuddy-duddies when it comes to that. But listen.
Wait, there's one thing I wanted to say before we go on is that Lore Olympus, which is a beautifully drawn story. If you're looking at the first printed volume of Lore Olympus and you're looking at it with a pro eye, you can a little bit tell that it was not drawn with print in mind. Yeah. They did what they could to make it pretty for that first volume. But Lore Olympus is gorgeous on a screen, but those first volumes represent work from years ago that wasn't created for print. And you can see it if you hold it up next to a book. It is a gorgeously drawn story. This is no shot at the artist who is immensely talented. What I'm saying is, though, that's a real world example of what happens when you go to print from an RGB file that wasn't intended to go to print.
Yeah. Oh, that's a great point. So don't take it from us. Go and take a look at that first volume and see and compare it to volume 2 and see the difference for yourself. That might be the best way to get this point across, because some of the stuff that we're talking about, it's like it's esoteric. There's these two guys talking about CMYK and rich blacks and what are they talking about? You can see it in real life. It's like when something's presented to you with an absolute real world experience that can make it something that makes so much more sense. It's just like when you're used to podcasts to go about an hour and then end. That's what you're expecting. That's what's going to happen here too, because right about now is the time that I should be saying that you've been listening to Comic Lab, the show about making comics and making a living from comics.
Your hosts have been my friend Brad Geiger, who delights me to no end. He is the editor of webcomics.com, and he's the creator of Evil Inc. at evilcomic.com.
Speaking of plane trips, have you ever been out? They come in for that landing. It's always the most dicey part of a plane trip. And sometimes, man, those wheels hit smooth. And sometimes the left-hand wheels hit before the right hand, and the whole plane goes blah, 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 right?
Yes.
That transition in today's show was kind of like bringing the plane in for a landing in the second category. But I will get a chance to say that you've also been listening to my friend Dave Kellett, the co-director of the comics documentary Stripped and the cartoonist of Sheldon at sheldoncomics.com and Drive at drivecomic.com.
And the Comic Lab theme song is used with permission from Andy Creighton at theworldrecord.net. And this episode was edited by Matt Woodard of Woodsong Productions over at www.woodsong.media.
If you love Comic Lab, you can rate and review the show on Apple Podcasts, and you may hear your review featured on a future episode. And thank you to all of you folks giving us a 5-star review on Spotify. You are helping to keep us up right at the top of the podcast charts.
And Comic Lab is made possible by your support on patreon.com/comiclab. So with a huge reminder that only patrons will be getting the San Diego Comic-Con exclusive episode, I will encourage you to go join us and support us and become part of the gang over at patreon.com/comiclab, because you will find a tremendous community of pro-ams, pros, amateurs, friends, and Brad and I over there sharing tips and tricks and pros on being a cartoonist. So do join us over at patreon.com/comiclab. So guys, Brad stayed with me at San Diego Comic-Con, and I got to tell you, the first night he's like, "All right, I'm gonna go shower up and change." for bed, and he jumps in the shower. But he comes out, he strolls out, ladies and gentlemen, in Batman pajama pants. And I got to tell you, if you ever wonder why Brad only has 2 kids, it might be the Batman pajama pants were purchased right after child number 2, and there was never an opportunity to get child number 3.
Yeah, after that second child, she said, okay, you're getting clipped right beneath the utility belt.